Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. My name is Abdul Lateef, and today I'll be telling you about my experience at Code Ninjas Denville, where I worked as a programming instructor or a code sensei, mainly teaching kids between the ages of 8 to 12 the fundamentals of programming, mainly focusing on Scratch and also on more advanced programming languages like JavaScript. My mentor throughout this whole process was Elena Mannerberg, who was the manager of Code Ninjas. And as far as my future plans, I expect to continue working there for the remainder of the summer, after which I will be hopefully attending NJIT's Honors College, majoring in computer science and neurobiology. And I hope to learn how I can apply computer science to solve issues in healthcare and build technologies like robotic prosthetics and medical robots, and basically use technology to make our lives as humans better through the field of healthcare. So during my day-to-day to Code Ninjas, I would come in and set the dojo or classroom up for the students. This involved setting up the computers, making sure all the programming materials and machines were ready to go. I would set up the programming environments, and at this point, the students would usually start coming in. I would greet them and get them pumped up, make sure they were ready to learn, and point them on whatever assignment that they needed to do on that day. At any given time, me and my coworkers would usually be handling around 50 children, and when they had questions was really where my programming experience really came in. Sometimes their questions could be as simple as, something's not working, help me understand it, and it could be, for example, a semicolon that was missing or a chunk of code that they didn't have that they needed to have. And this could actually get pretty difficult to solve because their programming lines could go anywhere from 10 lines to hundreds of lines. So I had to be very detail oriented and really hone in and use my programming background and knowledge to think about what could be possibly going on and get it solved as fast as possible in order to not lose the child's interest. But sometimes they also had more advanced questions. For example, a relatively simple example of this is when the students didn't understand Cartesian coordinate planes, which is a very frequent issue that we ran into because a lot of the programming was being done on animation, and to animate things you need to understand the concept of an X and Y coordinate plane and how to move around objects on this coordinate plane. So at this point, when they had a more advanced question, I would take the child up to the whiteboard, take out my marker, and do a little mini impromptu lesson on the concept. So these concepts could be as simple as Cartesian coordinate planes, as I mentioned, or for loops, data structures, also computer logic, for example. And by the end of it, hopefully they would have an aha moment and learn something from that experience. Aside from my day-to-day, we also had more special events. For example, hackathons in which the students and their parents would come in and program and then present their projects to their parents at the end of the day. And during these times, I would have to make sure that the parents were happy with their child's progress and have to address any concerns that they have. So I make sure that the customer is happy at the end of the day, and make sure the business in doing so was healthy. They also had staff meetings every month, and during these times I would bring up any concerns that I saw during my past month, as well as any suggestions that I had to make the business better. And also receive comments and suggestions on my own performance as an instructor during that past month, and I would use that to develop my own teaching style more. Before I became a sensei at Code Ninjas, I had to go through a training program, which involved going through every assignment and program the students would be asked to do. And this was really important because I had to pay attention to what issues that I thought I might encounter in the students' code when I actually got to the teaching part. So, for example, if a certain program's instructions weren't as clear, I'd have to remember this so that I could later explain it to the students better when I was teaching. And I also developed multiple games and programs during this training program that I did myself, that I'll be showing you in a second. So the first CTE standard and career-ready practice that I developed during my time at Code Ninjas was effective communication. So this came into play in two aspects of my job. The first was when I was talking to the parents at the end of the day when they're picking up their child, and also second when I was actually instructing my students in programming. My professionality and communication, I was talking to the parents, is really important because these were our end clients in the business, and I was the product that was being sold to them basically because I was the programming instructor. This is also really important because the time that they got to spend with me was very limited because they weren't allowed in the classroom. So when I was talking to them, I had to speak to them concisely but also warmly to address all their concerns on their child's progress. Often I found myself having to communicate some hard truths to them if I found that their child was not ready to move on. But over the course of my time at Code Ninjas, I found that I really developed a strong relationship with these parents, and I was able to develop trust in me through my communication with them, which is really important so that I would be able to be a better instructor towards their students. On the other hand, however, I found that I did have some difficulty breaking the ice and putting myself out there in the beginning when I was first meeting the parents. And I also found this when I was dealing with some new students that came in that I didn't already have that relationship with already established. I want to continue being a conversation starter and rather just being a conversation joiner in the future. And I think this is an area that I can improve. Over the course of my employment at Code Ninjas, I also developed many programs on my own. This took place during my training, when I was doing the curriculum, when I was making sample projects for my students, and on my own time using material from Code Ninjas. As you can see over here, we have a dragon racing game that I made, in which the player can dragon race, and as you can see, if the dragon crashes into the red area, the speed will decrease dramatically. And the code for this program is displayed on the left right here. There's another program that I made on the side, and this is a skiing game in which the user needs to reach the end of the course without crashing into the rocks or the trees. If you crash, it displays a great game over. And the code for this is also displayed on the left right here. Although these are some simple projects, I drilled through many of these during my year at Code Ninjas, and I found that practicing these fundamentals so often gave me a much sharper understanding of the inner workings and very details of code. And eventually this also helped me understand larger and more complex concepts in programming as well. By doing them at the micro level, it has increased my confidence in my ability to both program and explain my program to other developers. Another area that I worked in Code Ninjas was JavaScript programming, and I don't have access to the programs that I've made right now, but I can say that these projects also had a very similar effect on me. In the future, however, I want to work on using JavaScript to build websites, which is a field that I'm interested in addition to the game development and animation applications that I've used JavaScript. The vast majority of my day-to-day Code Ninjas is spent troubleshooting bugs in my students' code. In addition to just spotting them, however, I also have to go a step further and simply and concisely explain what the issue was to my students. I found that by having done this repetitively over and over again at my shifts, I'm able to identify patterns of common programming mistakes, and in doing so, my troubleshooting skills in my own code has gotten much faster. For example, here we have a program that I've been working on which is a Space Invaders game, in which the ninja at the bottom has to dodge the bombs dropping from the top. The game should display game over when the lives here hits 0. However, as you can see, it doesn't display game over until the lives hit -1. So I know based on my patterns that I have memorized that putting game over underneath when I start clone often gives you this common mistake. So to fix this, I would go to a different sprite and put in that same block of code here. And in doing so, we can see that it's fixed the problem. And we'll wait for the lives to hit 0. And as you can see, now it's displaying game over when the lives are at 0 instead of -1. Although I've gotten much better at troubleshooting my code by doing these kinds of exercises over and over again, I still think I can get much better at this. For example, one issue that I have right now is that I can be a little bit of a perfectionist when I'm troubleshooting my code. I try to clean up my code or move things around when I don't really need to, just to make it easier for myself when I'm troubleshooting. And I can speed up my troubleshooting much faster by avoiding these habits. And this is an area that I think I can definitely improve. My responsibility as a contributing citizen and employee developed most uniquely, I think, in the past few weeks during quarantine. Because of the COVID-19 outbreak, Code Ninjas did shut down physical operations, but we switched over to a virtual environment with the students instead. This, of course, came with its own challenges. I found the students were not as interested in this virtual environment. It was harder to keep their attention, and we did have connection and Wi-Fi issues galore. In addition to this, the corporate Code Ninjas did not provide us with reliable teaching materials, so I was teaching new programs that I'd never even trained on. And this was really where I had to step up and go outside of just my job description. We started developing a curriculum as we went, and I found that I started to instead train myself on these programs on my own time, even though it wasn't required for me. Just because I found that this made me a better instructor. Looking back, I wish I'd taken this kind of initiative earlier before the COVID-19 outbreak, because I found that taking time out of my own day when it was not necessary to really made me a better instructor and employee. And in the future in my career, I want to get better at identifying areas where I can contribute and take the initiative more when it's not required. This standard, attending to personal health, was my biggest challenge in my time at Code Ninjas. Just a few weeks before I began my employment, I developed acute dry eye syndrome, which made using computer screens really difficult for me without experiencing symptoms like nausea, disorientation, and irritation. Of course, this was a big complication because in this job, my main skill was my experience and ability to use computers. I found that sometimes when my symptoms flared up, I was unable to effectively debug a student's code, for example, and just be the best instructor I could. However, over time, I found that by limiting my screen time and when I knew that I had a shift coming up, I could still manage my symptoms and work effectively. This was a challenge for me because it was a significant lifestyle shift. I had to get my schoolwork that was online done more efficiently, and I could not afford to lose track of time when I was on my phone, for example. Otherwise, my eyes would not be rested for a shift. One thing that I would improve in this standard is that being more readily eager to raise these personal issues like health with my superiors. Sometimes I feel a little reluctant to raise issues like this with like my managers, for example. But when I did at Code Ninjas, I found that they were so extremely understanding and accommodating, and I really wish I had done this sooner. So I hope to work on this in the future. My first takeaway from my SLE was the importance of taking initiative. Looking back, when I was starting out as an employee, I used to stick with just the bare minimum what I was required to do in my day-to-day. I would, set up and clean the classroom, I would answer my students' questions, and do the training modules that I was required to do. But it took me a little bit before I went beyond this and started making some suggestions of my own, building relationships with my students, and helping out my coworkers when I didn't need to. Once I started doing these things, however, I found that I enjoyed my shifts a lot more because I was able to personalize and take pride in my work. When I was actively thinking about how I could make the business and my workplace better, I found that the daily routine of work didn't feel so routine anymore, and I was much more engaged and fulfilled. My second takeaway is to build a relationship with your manager or supervisor. You're going to be spending I spent a lot of time with my manager because at any given time, it was often the case that it was just me, my manager, and one other coworker working. And breaking the ice with my supervisor made the shifts much more enjoyable and feel much more lighthearted, which I often found to be a source of motivation and joy during slow hours or long shifts. I also found that finding common ground through camaraderie or common purpose in what you're doing there is a really good way to do it. My last takeaway was that communication is important not only in creating a more efficient work environment, but also in situations where you might need coverage or you're going to be late. Even though I tried to be punctual, there were some situations that are just out of my control. And initially, I tried to downplay this and cover it up if I was going to be late or if I needed coverage, because I was afraid of being noticed for not being punctual. But I quickly realized that, in fact, if I just, shot someone a text and let them know that, hey, I need coverage, or hey, I'm going to be late, we were all able to adapt to the situation, and at the end of the day, there really was no harm done. To conclude, my key advice to incoming seniors who are starting off their SLEs would be to find an aspect of your job, whatever it is, that you can really take ownership of. The day-to-day of work can soon start to feel monotonous if you stick with just the bare minimum, and because you might just feel like another employee. But by contributing something new to your work environment, or taking on a project of your own, or whatever it is, you'll feel much more valued, and more importantly, you'll be able to take more pride in and get more fulfillment from your work. I wish you the best in your SLE.